Hi, this is Bill Hartzer, and this is the Digital Marketing Podcast with Bill Hartzer, or the Digital Marketing with Bill Hartzer podcast. For today is January 20th, 2022. Have a couple different things to share with you today. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Some are domain names, some are social media, a couple of things that you probably didn't know. If you are listening to the audio of this, then what I can recommend is that you look and find one of the video versions, because I'm going to share my screen and today. And even though you're listening, you can take, yes, definitely keep these things in mind, but it may be helpful later on to go back and refer specifically to the video version where you can actually see the screen and so forth. And if you have any questions, certainly you can always get in touch with me and I'll be happy to help. So I'm going to share my screen and let's see. Okay. Okay, you should be able to see my screen. And this is the, you do a couple things here, these technical issues and so forth. They always are an issue. So let's make sure. Okay. Okay, move stuff out of the way. So this is my blog. Talk a little bit about, let's say, so this is one of my latest blog posts about Nava Hopkins and so forth, Washington consulting firm. Now, I'm going to take this as an example. So with social media, in particular, we're sharing, we may share this. This could be any blog post, any URL, even the homepage of your site. Basically, what happens is when you share a post on social media, like let's say Facebook, or LinkedIn. Okay, those are two examples. So in Facebook in particular, what Facebook does is they pull a preview. When you go to share a page, like share a post or share an article, what happens is, or share your homepage of a site, what happens is Facebook will, if they have never visited that URL before, they will actually go to the page real quick and they will get the title, the image, and the description, and they pull that data from the page, from the page. Now, what happens is they will cache that, and so what happens is, let's say, for example, I posted January 13th. I posted, and I don't like the fact that that the image that I'm using has Nava's head cut off a little bit. So I want to use a different image. And so I go and I update the post. Well, if somebody else shares that same post again on Facebook, and ideally, it's more than one that does the sharing. So when someone shares, Facebook doesn't go every single time back to see and look at the post. They say, okay, well, we already have the image and title and description and the preview, so let's just pull it from our own cache, our own database. But maybe yesterday or the day before, I went through and I updated the image because it just didn't look right. Okay, well, you can actually, before you post, or actually, even if you're not going to share it again, if you want to update that image, the image that in particular that Facebook has and they're using, you can actually go, there's a to the Facebook debugger, and it's developers.facebook.com/tools/debug, and you can put in the URL and you can hit debug, and you can tell Facebook to go ahead and scrape that again. And you're telling to scrape it again because there's an updated version. Now, 47 minutes ago, I told it to update it. Now, if I wanted to, if I, update the image, I can click this scrape again, and they will go and they'll update it. They'll get the latest title, the latest description, the latest, and so forth. Okay, so that's helpful, especially because if it's the preview's not showing up properly. Now, LinkedIn has what we call the post inspector. And earlier today, I was reminded of all of this because of the fact that it turns out a site I'm working with, a client I'm working with, their site kind of changed their name a little bit of their company name. And so the old version was showing up whenever someone shared their site in LinkedIn, in Facebook, or wherever. It had the old company name and the old logo and the old, image. So basically, what I recommended, and I was reminded, of the Facebook debugger, but also the LinkedIn post inspector. So basically, what you can do is put in that URL and tell LinkedIn to, you're telling them to inspect it. You want to see how that post is going to look before you post it. Okay, and you can tell them to inspect it. Well, they're actually doing the same thing as Facebook does, is they're scraping the latest information. Okay, and so and they're going and fetching the URL. LinkedIn gives you a little bit more information. They give you a preview of what it's going to look like. But then they also tell you, last time they grabbed it, which was a few seconds ago, they show the fetch URL and then the canonical URL, and that can actually, in some cases, be different. In most cases, it depends on the site and how you set your canonical URL. But in most cases, all cases on typically will have it the same. And then if there's a redirect, you want to make sure that if the pay, that there's no redirect. And if you're using like a short URL, then and you put that in here, then it'll show you the redirect and it goes to the right place. But again, if you're not sure about and you don't like the preview of how it's showing up when it's shared or posted, in particular, what I recommend is going to the sharing debugger on Facebook or the post inspector on LinkedIn. Okay, moving on. So I'm going to close a couple of these, and let's look. Another thing is, I do a fair amount of research with domain names and TLDs, which is TLD is a top level domain like .com, .net, .org. In fact, there are right now available through ICANN. There are 1,165 TLDs endings, .accountants, .abogado, .abbott, .AAA, a lot of these major companies have bought their own ending. Some are using them, some are not. So reason why I say is that there is, you may not be aware, but there's actually a zone file that can be requested. And so and there's a process. You go through ICANN and you look for the centralized zone data service. You have to sign up for that service, which is free. But you do have to sign up for it. And then for any of these 1165 TLDs, you can request the zone file, which is basically the zone file has a list of every single domain name that is registered for that TLD. So if you're, for example, if you wanted a list of all of every single domain name that's registered in .career or .careers or .cars or .com, for example, okay, you select it and you request access, and you have to give a reason when you request access, you kind of need to give a reason why you want that data. And usually when I'm doing research and for example, I need, I'm working with a registry and that owns some of these TLDs, and we want to do some research on search engine rankings and SEO and how many domains are actually being used and so forth. And lo and behold, the registry themselves, they don't really know that. So what has to happen is, they know what domains are registered, and that's in the zone file. But I actually take the zone file, take that data, and then maybe, my process, if I'm researching, I may crawl using a crawler and a web crawler and actually visit every single domain on that list and then gather certain information from it and do whatever I'm going to be researching whatever data I need. Usually that's with the registry, in conjunction with the registry. So what I will do is, in some case, is let them know that I'm going to be requesting access, and they will get an email or they'll get a notification that I requested access and why, and then they will grant it. And then I can actually go to my dashboard here and actually download the file, that I need, for example. So that said, that's that information normally is obviously a list. It changes every day, or it changes when somebody, a domain name expires and they don't renew it, it becomes available, and so forth. So those zone files are out there. It really only has a limited information. It has the name of the domain, it has the name servers, and that is currently pointed to, and it may have an IP address associated with it. So that's limited. It doesn't really have like the who is information, who owns it, or anything like that. That's a different database and different discussion, probably for a different day, of how to get that. Now, it came across my desk yesterday or the day before, up to 3 days ago, that there was a domain that was stolen. And that particular domain was SOO.com. And I'm kind of picking on this because this is a good example, a very good example. Now, I have some confirmation that this particular, just as a footnote, that this domain name is stolen. And based on what I have researched, and I'll show you how I've researched this. This is not a client. This is something, a separate situation that I come across. And I got involved because DN Protect, dnprotect.com, is a service where we recover stolen domain names, and we help the owners get their domain names back. And we also offer a service called domain protection. And so if you have a domain name that you obviously do not want to lose, and for whatever reason, for expiration, or maybe the renewal came up and you didn't pay, you didn't have the money to pay, your credit card didn't go through, whatever reason, somebody filed a UDRP domain dispute on the domain. They filed a trademark. It was a trademark issue. They filed, they sued the domain owner, whatever. If you have domain protection, then all of that is covered. And so anyway, so you won't lose your domain. Now, we also provide, DN Protect also provides stolen domain name recovery services. If your domain name goes missing, then you will want to contact DN Protect and so forth. Anyway, so this particular domain is an interesting example, and I'll go through this. So SOO.com came across my desk, and that it was a possible stolen domain. So I want to research it and find out, it really, what the situation is. Now, I went to the ICANN registration data lookup tool. And the reason why I'm going to this and looking it up here is because if I were to take a domain and look it up and look up availability or look up data that this particular, if I were to look up availability, for example, of a domain, whether it's taken or not, or even a look up at who is look up at a registrar, then there is a concern, not necessarily my concern. I'm not really concerned about it, but some people have expressed concern that the fact if they do a search at such and such registrar, that their search that they did, especially if the domain was available, and they did not register at the time, they may come back a day later and somebody registered that domain. So that domain, may or may not, be shared. Now, at this time, I do searches at the ICANN lookup because of the fact that typically I know that it's ICANN and it's going to be data that is up to date. And in theory, it's pulling from that particular database. Now, that is up to date. So basically, if we, what I'm looking for with this domain in particular is I'm looking for the name, looking at name servers, looking at expiration date and create date. This domain was first registered in October of '94, very old domain name, registered until 2024. It is currently held at the Namecheap registrar. That's all I really need from there. I do look at this and it looks like it is the ownership is being, the current owner is under privacy. That is a particular interesting point. So there's several things that have come down. So when I went to SOO.com and typed in the browser, at that time, the domain name was listed for sale. There was a landing page that said it was for sale for $50,000. Now, just knowing domains in particular, SOO.com is not worth $50,000. I would put it a value of at least 100, maybe even $200,000 or $300,000 because it is SOO.com and is a short domain and so forth. I won't go into evaluation right here, but the $50,000 price tag of it listed is very low. And that is a tip off for me. It's kind of like going on Craigslist and looking for a car and you find a 2021 Toyota 4Runner SUV that normally goes for, even on the used market, it would go for, $50,000 to $60,000, and it's listed for sale for $3,000 to $5,000. There's a reason why it's listed so low, and being in domain like this, that's a red flag. I mean, just plain and simple, it's a red flag there. Now, so let's go and let's look at the who is history. So what I can do is go back a page. I can go and look at look up the who is history using Domain IQ. I can look up the who has owned this domain name and what changes have been made over time. Some of the data might be there. Some of it goes back basically, 40. I want to look at the last few changes. So obviously here is that Namecheap. It's under privacy. We go back. It changed it was listed for sale at Dan, D-A-N, is a popular place to list your domain name for sale. Now, previously though, it was at registrar servers, okay? Same who is privacy and so forth, okay? Same as Namecheap. back in, first of, January 13th, it had changed again. Previously, I'm going back in time, from host Papa to registrar servers. Okay. Prior in, again, it was at Namecheap, but it was at host Papa, and, still under privacy. If we go back further on the 12th, though, however, it was at host Papa and Network Solutions. Okay. And it was at Network Solutions and was owned by this Macaera VIR Incorporated. I happen to look up this address, and this address shows on Google Street View, it shows a house, a residential house in a residential neighborhood, owned by Gregory at Macaera.com. Okay, and this is the address. So for years and years, as I go back, this ownership has always been open to the public. There's no reason, to put it under privacy. So all of a sudden, the domain goes under privacy, goes to Namecheap, and then changes name servers, and then is put up for sale within a few days. That can definitely be typically, based on my experience, I don't see any reason why, if it was registered at Network Solutions for many, many years and not going to not going to expire at 2023, why all of a sudden just change it to Namecheap? Sure, you could change, because of cost, because generally speaking, Network Solutions annual fees are higher than Namecheap. You might save $20 a year. Okay, but we'll make a note of that. Granted, in this case, though, I have been already told that it's possible that it was a stolen domain. So let me take a look at this Gregory at Macaera, who see if they own any other domains, and see if there are any domains. There's a macaera.info and so forth that is still listed, that is still owned by this. But, it turns out this Macaera, I just have, just done my research a little bit more, and let's see what happens when we do a search for, Macaera. Well, it turns out, if we go back around the same dates, back in November, December, turns out this Macaera was at Network Solutions also, with the same email address, gregory@macaera.com. And guess what? The domain name is in pending renewal deletion, and it was not renewed, and it expired. And this Swordfish Domains bought the domain, grabbed the domain name when it expired. And it turns out that then they was at Network Solutions, but then this Danny Sullivan, I happen to know him, but anyway, Danny Sullivan, who was a domain investor, had bought that domain. And it turns out that, again, you kind of have to question why, when you have data, your information as you're the owner, why all of a sudden who is information is, even though it's the same registrar, there's not really any really good reason, logical reason why all of a sudden it would go under privacy to hide the owner. Again, there could be good reasons, okay, but this Danny Sullivan knows, and I'm sure he knows, that who is ownership information is out there. We already know that he owns it. So why all of a sudden, there's not only any reason, turns out that he sold the domain name, sold it to somebody, and the privacy, and it was changed to HostGator. Changed to HostGator because my suspicions are that whoever the new owner was, wanted to recreate Gregory at macaera.com, who happens to own SOO.com, a much more valuable domain name. So in this case, as we start to put together a, look and see what happens, okay. And yes, again, it's still at Ever Solutions. Now, in theory, if somebody were to have control over the macaera.com and set up hosting and set up set up an email account, Gregory, in this case, Gregory at macaera.com, he would then be able to get into this Network Solutions account, most likely through a password reset, because he has his email set up, and then he gets access to the account, and he gets access to all of the domain names that are associated. It turns out that macaera.com, vir.com, soo.com, and montreal.com, soo.com and montreal.com being two domain names that are highly valuable, are all associated with this Gregory at macaera.com and so forth. So that paints a picture, a pretty good picture of how somebody steals a domain name. I am not going to, I don't have, even though there's a lot of information here, I'm not going to go and say that this, the current owner of SOO.com has stolen the domain. Could be something else, could be just some other good reasons. However, this is something that paints a picture and doesn't look good for the current owner, especially when they go list the domains for sale for a very cheap price. That said, so the bottom line takeaway of this is that you need to renew your domain names and protect them, because if you end up ditching and not renewing a key domain name that is associated with your other domain names somehow, then you will lose all your domain names. And this is one way of how they are stolen. Another good example of this is a recent case that you can look up that has been in the news. This one has not been in the news, but you can go look up the information regarding tilt.com and customtilt.com, which was owned at one point. Tilt.com was owned by Airbnb. The Airbnb on tilt.com, however, the whois information and the ownership details for tilt.com, TILT, was an email address, I believe, with customtilt.com. Well, somebody went and was able to purchase customtilt.com. They then get access to tilt.com, owned by Airbnb, but they were able to get access to specifically get access to tilt.com through customtilt.com, and Airbnb then proceeded to lose tilt.com, and I believe there was a UDRP dispute filed where they lost the domain there also. So like I said, when you are looking to secure your websites and valuable properties and domain names, the way to protect them is to make sure that you renew your domain names for at least 5 years or more. That is my recommendation. For my most valuable domain names, I register them for 10 years or more. The other consideration is the way this was set up. So if you look at the Makaera, MAKAERA.com domain, the owner is listed as Gregory at MAKAERA.com, which is the same domain. That is, highly not recommended because of the fact that if someone gets access to Makaera, then they can, there's no way that, or if the owner, Gregory, loses access to that email address, then there's, or loses access to the domain, they can have all sorts of problems and not have, and not be able to access the other domains that might be tied. And so this is a very good example of that, of why you don't want to use, I do not recommend using a free Gmail account, as your domain ownership as also, because unfortunately Gmail, Hotmail, Yahoo, a lot of these free email accounts also get hacked. Once they get hacked to that, they get access to your email, they get access to all your domain names as well. So I have a lot of more information about protecting your domain names and so forth, but wanted to go through a very specific example today. I'm not, at this point, I'm not saying that that SOO.com is a stolen domain name. However, all of the indications that I have based on research and so forth shows that there is something very fishy going on with this particular domain name, and that this is how somebody potentially got access to that particular domain that way, through an expired domain. So that said, this is the Digital Marketing with Bill Hartzer podcast for Thursday, January 20th, 2022. I will see you next week. Of course, if you have any questions about SEO, domain names, digital marketing, feel free to get in touch with me at hartzer.com, HARTZER.com. Thanks for listening today, and we'll talk to you next week. Thanks.